with Kentucky not breaking the race barrier before anybody else. He wanted to do it.
On the first day recruits could sign a national letter of intent, UK hosted Beard and his high school coach, Don Morris, on campus. He was the guest at a dinner at Spindletop Hall, attended by boosters, former UK players, and 5 living governors. He met the Kentucky football and basketball players. The coaches were certain they had their man.
Saturday, I dropped him off at the Phoenix Hotel. And I said, well, I think you know now to Mr. Rupp and the people of the university, the people of the Commonwealth want you here, Butch. Because he did have a question, I'm sure. He came from Wes about, but, and then he started crying. And I thought it was tears of joy. I thought it was just tears of joy. And he said, Coach, I signed at Louisville yesterday morning. And I was in shock.
My father, I had gotten with him, and he said, well, what are you going to do? He says, you know, you're going to have to make a decision. Otherwise, this is going to drive you crazy. And it says it's going to drive us crazy. And so as we were there the night before, I told him, I said, look, I think I'm going to go ahead and go to U of L. I said, I'm going to go to U of L because it's closer to home. Your mom can get up. You know, you can come up and stay. We had an aunt up there. You can come up and stay with Aunt Queen, you know, and I think that's what I'm going to do.
Butch, I think, was more interested in being a pioneer and was going to be the pioneer until at the last minute he got cold feet and changed his mind.
I knew Wes. I had spent some time in '64 when we were at the state tournament. We were, like I said, in the same hotel. They were across the hall from me, and I had gotten to know him a little bit. And so to me, it was easier going with what I knew than going to the unknown.
Rupp was convinced Louisville had signed Beard prematurely, but his protests were ignored.
Coach Rupp got on the phone to the commissioner of the Missouri Valley. He just laughed in Coach Rupp's face. And since Coach Rupp was not the most popular guy with the NCAA or anybody else he beat all the time, nobody helped him. Nobody helped him. And he got no help from the SEC office.
It was Butch Beard's choice not to go to Kentucky. It wasn't Adolph Rupp's choice to not have Butch Beard. He wanted Butch Beard. Mr. Basketball in Kentucky, he wanted him. He recruited him. Butch Beard didn't want to be the first black player going to Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana, where bad things happen to black people.
Later that year, in the summer of '65, the University of Kentucky would become the first integrated football team in the history of the Southeastern Conference, signing Louisville prep star Nat Northington. The following year, 1966, was a defining one for basketball at the University of Kentucky, the SEC, and African Americans everywhere. In 1966, Texas Western came seemingly out of nowhere to win the NCAA championship. But one of the more unlikely teams to be involved in the Final Four that year was Kentucky, picked to finish 3rd or 4th in the Southeastern Conference, coming off a 15-10 season with no player taller than 6'5". But new assistant coach Joe B. Hall convinced Adolph Rupp to allow him to implement a challenging preseason conditioning program, which paid off when it was time to begin practice.
As a result of that program, we hit the floor that year stronger than we've ever been and in better shape.
When he came in, he started a running program that we basically started as soon as we got back to school, which all of us just hated.
Consequently, we literally ran over teams.
The Wildcats ripped off an incredible run, winning 23 of 24 regular season games.
These guys were warriors, boy. They'd fight you to the death, you know, and they had great pride in Kentucky, and it was just a fun team to watch.
We just took off. We were a team that started the season nobody had any hopes for, and we just took off, and we won our first 10, 11, 12 games by big margins, and then boom, it became a fantasy year.
They beat Dayton and Michigan in the NCAA Mideast Regional in Iowa City and then headed for College Park, Maryland, site of the Final Four. The top-ranked Wildcats had a date with second-ranked Duke.
The Duke game was the featured game of that tournament. We were ranked number 1, they were ranked number 2. And the word was out, whoever won that game would walk into the championship.
I think a lot of our fans, and I think other fans in the country, felt like that was the big matchup. And then once we beat Duke, that the national championship was going to kind of be an afterthought.
Kentucky prevailed, but the victory drained the Wildcats. Larry Conley, who had been stricken with the flu in Iowa City, was weak and dehydrated. Pat Riley had been playing with a painful case of athlete's foot. They had less than 24 hours to prepare for the national championship game.
Yeah, I had the flu. Yeah, Pat Riley had an infected toe and couldn't run very well. But you know what? When you're playing for a national championship, you look past all that. I mean, you've got to. You just put it aside. You go out and you play.
Larry did have the flu, and they were kind of up all night with him, giving him IVs and taking care of him. And we got into the arena next night, and it was like, okay, guys, this is it. This is your final game.
In 1966, the semifinals were played on a Friday and the championship game on a Saturday, with no off day or media opportunities in between.
None of these things that happen today, and I don't mean it disrespectful, but the circus-type atmosphere where they have all the press conferences and all the build-up and all that they have today, didn't exist in those days.
In the years since, Kentucky versus Texas Western has been framed as the moment in time when college basketball changed forever, a black starting five beating an all-white traditional power. But there were virtually no mentions of it before or after the game.
It seemed to be such a sensitive topic that you brought it up only at your own risk. And a sports page at that time didn't seem to be the place to bring it up.
I mean, obviously, you can look out on the floor and you know, your eyes don't deceive you, but race was not an issue in that game at the time.
I didn't know who they were. None of us knew who they were. And we found out later that they were a very good team.
It wasn't about that. It was simply about trying to win an NCAA championship. And it wasn't until years later that all of a sudden people made a big deal of it.
There was nothing racial about that game. It was never mentioned. In fact, we beat Michigan 2 games before. We played them. And they had Cassie Russell and a couple others. And so, as I even asked Larry Conley at one time when I saw him, I said, did I miss something? You know, because you started reading about it. He said, no, there was nothing said racially.
I'm sure there's some people that, you know, and that's for other people. If that's the way they feel, that's the way they feel. From my perspective, it was a basketball game that was a pretty exciting game, pretty exciting time, getting to play in the championship game in the NCAA, someplace I never thought I would be.
We were trying to win a ball game, and we had played against teams previous that had a number of black players on them. You know, not any in the SEC, of course, but we had played against throughout the season, so it wasn't a unique experience to do that.
Kentucky had been a national team, really. They Coach Rupp would take them to Madison Square Garden in New York or Chicago Stadium or New Orleans. They were definitely the program, the class program in college basketball.
He was the greatest coach of the greatest basketball university in the country. And they had all white guys at a time when universities, other basketball programs were being integrated.
African Americans, who were developing more and more of a voice in the 60s, did notice.
We just see in black and white, and consciously and subconsciously we see in black and white. And so, you know, it was very apparent. It was very apparent when you looked into the crowd and you saw, you know, a predominantly white crowd, and you saw the Confederate flag there. When you looked around press row, and then you see these 5 black guys in these orange uniforms, you know, sort of sashaying out real coolly and calmly to play against these 5 white guys, and knowing the history of the University of Kentucky.
In a book about the evolution of Sports Illustrated called The Franchise, author Michael McCambridge quoted writer Frank DeFord, who in 1966 covered the Kentucky-Texas Western game. According to McCambridge, DeFord had been granted access to the Kentucky locker room. At halftime, he wrote, DeFord allegedly heard Rupp use racial epithets to describe the Texas Western players. He talked that way all the time, DeFord reportedly said. The comments never appeared in anything DeFord wrote, as they were understood to be off the record, according to the book. DeFord politely declined our request for an interview, saying the Kentucky-Texas Western game has been so misrepresented from what happened at the time that I just decided not to talk about it anymore. The Runts adamantly deny hearing Rupp use language so specifically offensive.
I never heard him say anything like that, okay? I mean, I cannot recall. I mean, if I could, I would tell you. I cannot recall that, all right? I recall him, you know, calling people a lot of things, but I don't remember that.
Coach Rupp never let anybody in that locker room except the team and the officials that were with the university. I mean, there were times he wouldn't even let the president of the university in the locker room.
After their college careers ended, both Conley and Cron developed friendships with DeFord, and while they deny hearing Rupp's comments, they defend his credibility.
I think Frank is an honorable reporter, and if he said he was in the locker room, I'm sure he was.
If Frank said he was in there, I'm not going to dispute that, because I think Frank is a gentleman. I've known him for a long time, but I certainly don't remember him being in there.
Texas Western won the game 72-65. Adolph Rupp was denied a fifth national championship.
There were a lot of people at that time who thought that, you know, he's getting old, let's put him on the shelf. He's out of touch with players. And for him to come back that year, it rejuvenated him. I mean, he got that fire back in his belly again. I mean, he really wanted it badly.
Eventually, Rupp was linked by some basketball historians to this game as a sinister presence.
Rupp was larger than life. He made himself an easy target. And people have taken the historical truth that a team starting 5 black players from Texas beat a team starting 5 white players from Kentucky, and have made that into Adolph Rupp was a racist. That's a logical progression that is illogical. Makes no sense to me in any way. You know, it was a coincidence of time.
He got tagged with that, and it grew and it grew and it grew. And then he probably, with his stubbornness and so on, he probably did very little to explain it away. So I think he just kind of got hung with that tag.
In fact, many believe Kentucky and its coach would have been better off losing to Duke in the national semifinal game.
I always wondered what would have happened if we'd lost and Duke had played Texas Western. Would they have been pointed out as being segregationists?
First thing I think, what if Duke had beat us and played them? They wouldn't have had a Simon Legree, so to speak.
And I always said the worst thing that ever happened to Coach Rupp was beating Duke, because had Duke won that game, there's no way that Duke ever would have been the lightning rod that Kentucky was.
You look at it and you say, yeah, I'm really sorry that it has that taint to it. You know, really I do, because I would rather Texas Western just assume the national championship and Kentucky finish second, and that would be the end of it. But it was not to be.
For the players involved, their memories of that game are forever linked to more than the joy of earning a shot at a national championship.
I'm very proud of what we did that year. I'm very proud that we got there. I'm disappointed that we didn't bring the title home. The controversy is a separate issue. It wasn't there at the time, so I mean it wasn't a part of that game for me.
We get a lot of notoriety being runner-up in the Rupp's runs, so no, it doesn't take anything away, except just wish we would have won.
How many people get a chance to play on a basketball team that's ranked #1 in the country all year long? Okay, how many people get a chance to play in the Final Four? How many people get a chance to play in the championship game? How many people really get a chance to win one? You know, it's not a large group of people.
It's proved to be a very important milestone in the growth of and the proliferation of the black athlete and particularly the black basketball player in this country. That's a significant issue to be involved in that game. But back then it wasn't part of it, so it hasn't tarnished anything for me.
The controversy will be there forever. I mean, I don't think it'll ever go away because it has been built up. It is now a fixture among basketball people, that national championship game, and it is ingrained in the mind of everybody who ever was around at that point.
Regardless of how it was perceived then and now, the Texas Western Kentucky game did mark a turning point in college